I'm Claudine Wong. This all comes as Governor Newsom and President Trump battle it out in court in a case that asks the question, did the federal government violate the law when President Trump sent the California National Guard to Los Angeles over the objections of Governor Newsom? Let's go to KTVU's Jana Katsuyama for more on all of this and how Oakland fits into it. Jana?
Claudine, President Trump's remarks about Oakland suggest that it might be next on his list as he announced today that he's deploying National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. And here at the federal building in San Francisco, California's attorneys argued that that would be illegal. Today, a federal judge heard testimony in the first day of a 3-day trial. Inside a courtroom at the federal building in San Francisco Monday, it was Newsom versus Trump, as attorneys for California Governor Gavin Newsom and U.S. attorneys for the Trump administration argued the boundaries of the president's legal authority to deploy National Guard troops on domestic soil. The 3-day trial started just as President Trump announced a new deployment to Washington, D.C., along with mentioning crime in other cities, including Oakland.
You look at Chicago, how bad it is. You look at Los Angeles, how bad it is. We have other cities that are very bad. New York has a problem. And then you have, of course, Baltimore and Oakland. We don't even mention that anymore. They're so far gone.
President Trump's announcement comes after he deployed National Guard troops in Los Angeles back in June. The president said then that he was protecting federal buildings and federal employees' safety as they conducted immigration actions. But California is challenging that. The state is asking federal judge Charles Breyer to rule that Trump's actions violate a federal law, the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. It bars the president from using military troops to conduct domestic law enforcement. As for Oakland, Mayor Barbara Lee sent us a statement saying in part, quote, President Trump's characterization of Oakland is wrong and not grounded in facts, but in fear-mongering. Our comprehensive public safety strategy is working. Crime rates are coming down. Longtime attorney Adante Pointer agrees.
Here in Oakland, like many of the cities he's targeting, crime is actually down to pre-pandemic levels. And in some of those cities that he's talking about, they're actually at record lows. So he's actually churning up or creating the hysteria around crime.
Last week, Oakland police revealed data showing that crime this year has decreased significantly since the same period last year. Homicides in Oakland down 21%, rapes down 24%, and robberies down 41%. Now, back here live in San Francisco, the attorneys are expected to come back to the courtroom again tomorrow, day 2, again, of a 3-day trial. And this is a big case, Claudine, that could have implications nationwide.
Yeah, Jana, after day 3, do we know if we expect a decision to come back right away, or will it be a while before we hear a ruling?
Well, it isn't clear exactly how quickly Judge Breyer will be able to make a decision, but certainly this is something that has some urgency. So, you know, I think both sides are hoping that they can get this resolved here. But make no mistake, this probably won't be the last stop. This will probably be appealed potentially all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Yep, a very closely watched case. Jana Katsuyama, thank you so much. Well, there is reaction coming in from Bay Area lawmakers to President Trump's announcement about the National Guard deployment in Washington. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi posted on X, writing, Donald Trump delayed deploying the National Guard on January 6th when our Capitol was under violent attack and lives were at stake. Now he's activating the D.C. Guard to distract from his incompetent mishandling of tariffs, health care, education, and immigration, just to name a few blunders. Congressman John Garamendi released a statement that said in part, I'm appalled by Donald Trump's decision to federalize the D.C. Police Department and deploy 800 National Guard troops in D.C. The Constitution is clear that the maintenance of peace and prosecution of unlawful actions are local responsibilities. He went on to say, as Trump erodes the very protections our founding fathers laid out in the Constitution, the American people must defend our foundational values. Our democracy depends on it. All right, joining us now for more insight on all of this is UC Law Professor David Levine. Thanks so much for coming in.
Of course.
All right, let's talk about it. Section 740 is what President Trump is saying in Washington, D.C. Explain what that means.
Well, he's invoking power that was given to him under what's called the Home Rule Act of 1973, because if we go back, the District of Columbia is uniquely under federal power, right? It's not a state. It is definitely under congressional power. In fact, there's a district clause in the Constitution that specifies that. But Congress did grant the District of Columbia some power about 50 years ago, and so that they do have a mayor and they have a board of supervisors and all that. But it's quite clear that the president does have some power to step in, to invoke some emergency power. He loves to invoke emergency power, and this is one of the instances. It looks like he would have 30 days to control the police department as long as he notifies Congress, and of course that's trivial. After 30 days, he would need to get congressional authorization to continue to do that.
And there's no threshold for this 30 days. He can just do it, and then when the 30 days is up, Congress needs to weigh in, or all of this has to end.
Right, that's right. Well, maybe it's slightly more complicated because here's why. There's a lot of federal property in the District of Columbia, right? And after all, it's the nation's capital. And he certainly would have power to do things like dispatch the federal police departments like the Park Police, the Capitol Police, and others to, let's say, to protect federal properties. And there's a lot of federal land. There's a lot of little parks and other land. The big mall, for example, that we see at the July 4th and at the inauguration is all federal property. So he could continue to create more of a presence using federal officers in those federal properties, so that he can do a lot. Uniquely, he can do a lot in the district.
So D.C. is unique, but he mentioned other cities today. He mentioned New York, Chicago, Baltimore, Oakland. In the days leading up to this decision about D.C., he made a lot of comments about homeless, about crime. Crime numbers, we should mention, in D.C. are down to their lowest levels since the pandemic. National crime numbers are down. In Oakland, the city leaders have talked about crime numbers also being down in double digits. Those cities are not under federal jurisdiction like Washington, D.C., but he has been talking about them. Bringing them up now has people wondering if they are next on his list to try to impart some federal control over those cities. What is the pathway to that, if that is what he wants to do?
Right. There's certainly concern that all of this, just as Los Angeles was kind of a trial balloon as to what could he get away with, and D.C. is, again, maybe a trial balloon, and maybe he'll want to try to do something else. It's harder to see a legal path in these other places because, let's say, if he wanted to declare an emergency in Illinois, he would need the governor to go along. In Los Angeles, the excuse was he was invoking power related to immigration. But he's not talking about that now. He's talking about invoking power to stop crime, but that's uniquely a local and a state responsibility. So I don't think the same arguments would work legally. So I think he would get much more pushback if he were to try this in Oakland or in Chicago or New York as compared to D.C., because the power structure is different because of the unique status of the District of Columbia.
These are also Democrat cities versus, I would think the standard would have to be employed in all cities, regardless of which political party was in power in those cities. That would have to be a legal argument as well, that it would have to be across the board.
One would hope. So that one thing that's been true, now with immigration this has been true, and again with this argument about crime, is that if the president were serious about this being a problem of violent crime, then you would be taking other steps. You would be looking to the cities that have the most murder, the most violent crime, and those are in Republican-run states. Those are not in Democratic-run states.
Okay, before we let you go, we just have a very quick moment here. In the court case today, what are your thoughts about what happened today?
Well, they're inching along. I mean, Judge Breyer, I think, learned some interesting information. I think the figure that I heard was that 75% of the ICE raids have included National Guard, and that sure sounds like crossing the line into law enforcement. So I would assume, although Jana said she doesn't know when the opinion will come out, I suspect we will hear from the judge relatively quickly after the hearing is done, and that my guess is that he will say that there was illegal deployment of the National Guard because of this concern that and the Marines certainly, because you don't want federal law, not law enforcement, but federal military engaged in local law enforcement. And it may well be that he will make findings saying that they crossed the line in Los Angeles.
All right, we'll wait and see. David Levine, thanks for your expertise, as
Anytime.
always. All right.